Yes. Lovely. I'm supposedly live now. That is great. Okay, guys. Welcome back to Karim Talks About Economics, and this is episode 8. Uh, I'm filming this the same day that I filmed podcast number 7, and that is because this is the real podcast for today. So, as always, 3 things that characterize Karim Talks About Economics podcasts. They are spontaneous, they are informative, they are open minded. They are spontaneous in the sense that I plan the least and I allow us to move in certain directions that I have not planned ahead, and therefore it also is informative in the sense that we might connect some dots that we have not previously connected, which is something that allows us also to be open-minded about things. There's no specific agenda, and therefore we might reach new conclusions or maybe be able to argue for our opinions in a stronger manner. And we might see an example of this today later on. So the agenda, as per usual, starts out with a small uh, talk about the recent news, especially now in the Corona time. This is quite, I think, interesting and very informative as well. Um, and then we're going to have a follow up from last time, and today's podcast is going to be slightly different than it would otherwise have been, because the question that we asked at podcast number 6, which was what drives cheap prices, is it cheap production or high demand? Well, we've already answered that in podcast number 7. So today I have a surprise with you, which is that I got my interviewee, Omar, to come back, because we discovered that I might have taken some of his ideas to the extreme, and some of the things he really didn't mean. He did not, or I let me take the blame. I misinterpreted it, so he's going to open our minds up for his ideas and his true vision of his perception of the world. And then we're going to go into reading, I think, because Omar has to leave a little bit early. So we're going to be visited by Adam Smith once again. And then we're going to develop the new thoughts. And at the end, we might have a Q&A if there exist any questions. So with respect to news, just give me a second here. I'm going to do something different, which is that I've taken screenshots, which limits the bad parts of having a very laggy podcast. Now it's just as a static picture, right? So let's see. So here I'm just going to share my screen with you, and let's first look at the Corona. And I took these screenshots less than 5 minutes ago, or at least 5 minutes before I started this podcast. So we are very close to 11,500,000 cases. Um, more than half of these cases have already recovered, which is quite good, and also highlights the fact that it may be more younger people that are now getting the virus, or maybe the virus strength is, or then maybe the virus has weakened. Who knows? Not even the scientists can agree upon this. And 535,000 have sadly gone because of this virus. Yes. If we consider the countries, the numbers from yesterday suggest that the US and Brazil are doing better, actually significantly better. Um, the United States is 8,000 below yesterday, and Brazil is nearly 10,000 below yesterday. However, we see that India has increased by 3,000, and down here at number 16, we see that South Africa might be going the wrong direction, be heading the wrong direction, or at least it has stagnated, and now we have a constant amount of people that are getting deceased. But now here consider we have not considered South Africa for the yeah for the most part of this podcast, because we usually just look at the top ranking. But it seems that if South Africa continues this this trend, we will see it at the top quite soon, as it is evolving much more than all the others, right? Let's see. So yes, Bloomberg. Um, there's not much here beside people in the UK not happy with the 5G, but that is not new news. Of course, also Bloomberg focuses more on the finance part of the world, and there's really not much to grab on here. Maybe tomorrow when the markets open, there will be something else. We can see here a picture of London that has reopened, and we can see that there is a lot of people on the streets, which indicates that maybe the spread of the virus, if it is, if these people don't take care, and as we can see here, they don't, the cases in the UK might start to increase again if one who is infected is not properly detected in due time and isolated from the world. Not from the world, but rather from the rest of the population at least, and maybe also his family is kept under maybe a house arrest or something. Not a house arrest, because that sounds negative, but maybe they stay in their houses, or maybe the hospital if the case is turns out severe. Now here you will see that yesterday was the 4th of July, which relates to some other news, which is that there was a lot of shootings in the US, as you can see here. There are at least 14 people that have died yesterday. And one of those shootings happened in a bar where I think 2 died and 8 were injured. I don't recall the state where this happened. However, it is quite um, well. Firstly, it's not good to hear that bars have opened in the U.S., and secondly, it's not good whenever you have a shooting um, in the U.S., especially with also all the uprising that's happening at the moment with all the demonstrations and such. And lastly, we have the BBC News, and here they are again focusing on what happened in Catalonia yesterday, that they made a complete lockdown of a city with approximately 210,000 people, that where no one can either enter nor exit the city at this point. This might give an indication into how cities, I wouldn't say cities, but maybe countries will react to a possible second wave. Now, which is quite interesting, which I did not see on the front pages of other news agencies, is this news that Kanye this morning, or at least for me this morning, tweeted out something with that he might be running for president, or he said it actually directly, that we knew a new vision and that he is running for president. Now, he does not say that he's running for president this term. However, he has a hashtag where he says Vision 2020. Of course, that might be in support for Trump, as we know he at least in the past has worn the red hat, red mega hat, I suppose they call it, and he's also been in the Oval Office and greeted Trump, and Trump has talked favorably about him. However, now it seems as if he's running for president, and Elon Musk, quickly said that he has his full support. Right? Is this really going to happen? Well, we don't really know, and therefore I'm not going to comment on this any into depth. if he does go out in an interview and says that he is actually running and this is not for fun, well, that might be a totally different story, and then it would be definitely be worth us discussing it here. Not only for the impact on the election, but also the behavioral impact that it has on the United States, right? Because here this really plays into political economy, right? Where is the median voter in the U.S. at this point? But let's keep that discussion if that really happens. I will now switch back to so you can see me, as we'll now go to Omar, and I actually have him here on I actually have him here on the phone, and I'm gonna put him on speaker right now. So hi Omar, I understand that there are some things that we might need to go into a little bit more depth with.
Hello, Karim. Yes. I would love to go into depth on a lot of the things that we discussed yesterday.
Yeah.
And a lot of the points that you made in podcast number 7.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry for maybe well, carrying on your thought to the very extreme, but usually we just try to do that as economists, which is helpful to understand whether the idea is feasible in the long run. But maybe I've misunderstood your ideas. So maybe you can tell me where we could start here. What is the most significant misunderstanding from my part?
Well, the most significant misunderstanding, I would say, has to do with people's choice, right? We gave the example of McDonald's and Tim Hortons, right?
Yes.
For that example, I said you said, do you want people to boycott or innovate? Follow boycotting or follow innovation? And I said I would always prefer for people to follow innovation, and I still hold that true. And then we used the McDonald's and Tim Hortons example, and then you assume that I want people to boycott Tim Hortons when it's actually quite the opposite. I don't want people to boycott. That's just giving people freedom of choice, right? Boycotting is abstaining from someone's service or product as an act of protest, right? Not because of choice, not because of freedom of choice. People aren't going to be abstaining from Tim Hortons. People are not going to be abstaining from oil as an act of protest. They're going to be abstaining from oil because that's the choice that they have because they live in this free country.
Yes, definitely. Well, yeah, it was maybe a very strong word to say boycott. However, what I meant with the word boycott, and maybe you have a different understanding of the world or of the word boycott, is just that you choose not to do it, and if you talk to other people, you might disencourage them or at least argue with them that they should not do the same. In my view, vegetarians are, for instance, boycotting meat, um, and that's what that was how I was trying to relate it, in the sense that you're boycotting Jim Hortons, I think, in this example, because they are not environmentally friendly.
But boycotting would be the wrong word to use, because boycotting, there's an underlying tone that's protesting what's happening.
Yeah.
Right? We're not protesting anything here. We're just using our freedom of choice to choose something else.
Yeah. But we do mean the same thing, I suppose.
Yeah, when it comes to choice, I would say, and encouraging other people.
Yeah.
And it's not other people like that you don't know, would be friends and family, people that are closest to you.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's.
And they would see it as your own personal belief, not as a thing that they have to do. You know?
Yeah, definitely. It's not that we go in and then we smash down Jim Hortons, maybe, but it's not to that extent, of course. But the idea is, at some point, if that happens to a large extent, they will go out of business, right? But my argument was that, well, if they could produce it cheaper at some point, maybe if they produced a product that you could not live without, you would at some point be willing because they will offer you such a cheap price for the product that you would be willing to compromise maybe your moral standpoints and go into James Harden's, even though they don't live up to the moral standpoints of being environmentally friendly. That was the argument about taking a premium. And maybe even McDonald's, right, could exploit you, as I said in podcast number 7, and ask you a premium, right?
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
But first of all, just in case there are any Canadian listeners, it's Tim Hortons, right? We don't upset anyone. Canadians get pretty riled up over that. We get riled up over that and hockey. Anything hockey related, anything Tim Hortons related, we get pretty angry.
Yeah.
But yeah, that all depends on what the people want.
Yeah.
Right? It's always going to depend on what people want at the end, and that's what's going to influence the market, and that's what's going to influence the direction that the market's heading. If oil is going to go out of business because Generation Z thinks that oil is destroying the earth and they don't want to use oil anymore because it is destroying their planet, then that is their choice, and that is the choice that they make to abstain from it.
Definitely.
And that's just how it will be. They will go out of business.
Yeah.
And that's fair, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that we also see, as you mentioned yesterday, is that the basic needs are really met now. So people really are willing to pay a premium for things that are environmentally friendly. And I think the investors of, and it might, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the share of a company such as Tesla has skyrocketed. And maybe that is because the investors see your point, right? They might see that people are willing to pay a premium for something that is supposedly environmentally friendly.
Mm-hmm. People are, yeah, and I've noticed that as well. You don't even have to look at statistics. You can look at everyone's anecdotal evidence. You can see that people, McDonald's even, right? We can go back to McDonald's. We've been talking about McDonald's already. They should sponsor this podcast, but McDonald's, they're introducing healthy options. Just a couple of years ago, McDonald's introduced the salad, right?
That's true.
McDonald's, for the longest time, has been known to serve fast food, unhealthy food, the McRib, the Big Mac, and whatnot. And just now, they've introduced salads, and they're really trying to cater to the
and veggie burgers also. I actually tried their vegetarian burger.
The Beyond Patty or Beyond Meat burgers?
I have no idea what it's called. But I noticed that even though it was the size of a cheeseburger, right, and it was exactly the same setup, just a vegetarian patty, it was 50%, the price was 50% higher. Now, of course, it was very small regardless, but it was 50% higher. 10 kronas and 15 kronas respectively for the meat and the non-meat option.
50%, that's a substantial amount. Now, I don't know exactly where the 50% comes from. Maybe it comes from veggie burgers not being upscaled enough. Maybe it comes from there not being enough demand. I don't know where it comes from exactly. There not being enough supply. But yeah, currently, if we do continue in the route where there's only a select amount of people, if only the young generation, which I would say you're the cutoff, quite frankly. If only we are the population that are seeking environmentally friendly things, then yes, these things are going to be very, very expensive. But if we choose as a globe, altogether as a whole, to change our what we consume exactly, and the products that we use, and make sure that they're environmentally friendly, the price will go down. And I think you actually refuted that in podcast number 7, correct?
Can you maybe rephrase it, or say but because I noticed something in what you just said, and I want to also relate that to something that I said in podcast number 7, and maybe that's the same thing we're talking about. I talked about that these environmentally friendly things, or at least the things that are perceived as environmentally friendly, usually have a premium, which means that it is richer people that can buy these things, and therefore they are both rich and have a higher moral standpoint, right? However,
Correct.
poor people will be both less financially stable, but they will also, I suppose, opt out from the moral standpoint because they cannot afford it, right? So that suddenly increases the gap between these two sections of the population.
How so?
Well, because now you're rich and have a higher moral ground, right? Which I suppose we can call kind of a privilege, because you have money and you're privileged enough to be able to say, "Hey, I want my things to be environmentally friendly because I'm willing to pay a premium," right? However, if you don't have the money to buy this premium, i.e., you are poor, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly people will look at you. Hey, are you trying to destroy the world, right? While that might not be the case.
Well, see, that's the goal. The goal here is to try to cheapen environmentally friendly options that are now currently at premium. Try to cheapen them as much as we can.
Yeah.
For example, when Elon Musk launched Tesla, the first car that he brought out was the Tesla Roadster, a sports car. And his vision was to come out with a sports car, a very, very expensive and highly priced and luxurious sports car, priced, I believe, at 200,000 or whatnot.
Yes.
And his vision was to slowly make the cars cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to appeal to the basic consumer. Right? The more money and the more available and the more accepting people become of electric cars. And that's exactly and precisely the movement that we need to do with everything else.
Yeah, but that of course happened with being financially viable, and also the production and the gigafactories, right? It's not mega factories that he's created, but he's created some of the largest factories in the world, and he has autonomized those factories, right? They are some of the most autonomized.
Yes, it's innovation beyond imagination.
Exactly.
It's innovation that we need.
Exactly. And also one thing that you have to consider is that this company really doesn't have a profit yet, which is quite fascinating, in my opinion, that it can be valued that much, even though it doesn't really have a profit yet. But apparently that's something that we're willing to live with, right? And the investors are willing to put even more money into that.
Yeah, because they believe in the cause.
Yeah.
They believe in the. Well, I'm not really educated on the economic side of Tesla, right? I hope you can educate me on that here today. But yeah, I mean, it's a good cause. They know investors, I would say, are smarter than both you and I, right? They know where their money is going. They know that it's going towards a good cause, and they know that their money is going to make more money, and that's why they keep putting it in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, on the other side, you also have those that don't believe in Tesla and believe that this is like once the other car manufacturers have followed, right, and they also start to produce these electric cars, the share of Tesla will not be that special. It's only because there's something special about this stock um, that have risen the price. Now, of course, I've not looked into the annual reports. These are mainly some quick data that I've looked up, and usually just the news. And yeah, I also listen to some podcasts that talk about Tesla. Um, but yeah, it's about this privilege, right? Um, it's quite interesting. But do you think this kind of difference between the two groups of the societies will enlarge with time, or the innovation will hmm, catch up such that there will not exist this large difference between the moral standpoints that exist due to the difference in the wealth of different citizens?
Well, I think the moral standpoints there's a moral standpoint between the different generations, right? Generation before us will die off, right? Not to be so like crass.
That's quite bleak, yes. That is quite bleak.
But they will die off. I'm talking about our current generation, Gen Z, and the generations coming, right? We're the future. So in terms of a moral standpoint, we're all going to share the moral standpoint. There's not going to be a gap between anyone's thinking when it comes to moral standpoints.
No, you have my brother. No, no, I want to stop you there just before you know my brother. My brother doesn't care for these things. He says just burn as much oil as possible. Man. He says no, I don't think he's an outlier. A lot of people, a lot of liberals here in Denmark, at least, or social. I suppose you wouldn't call them liberals, but here in Denmark we call them liberals, and they might argue that we're going too far with this, right? We should try to make it financially stable.
These are people our age.
Yes. Yeah, I was also a quite active part of youth politics, so I know these kind of people.
Okay, well, different political views are going to exist.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, sorry. Let me backtrack now and refute my own point. Yeah, different political views are going to exist. That's not what I mean. What I mean is generally as a whole, there will be a change in the fundamental way we think. We're going to be more aware of the environment. But when it comes to accessibility to devices that are better for the environment, I think that there's not going to be a gap between people that have them and people that don't have them.
Okay.
Like I said, things that are luxuries now that I think are going to become normal in the future. And this has been seen with a lot of things.
Yeah.
Refrigerator, the automobile, right? The basic refrigerator, automobile, stovetop was a luxury 100 years ago. Even the computer was a luxury 20 years ago, and now everyone has one in their pockets. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So cars like Tesla, hydro dams, nuclear reactors, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Are going to be more accessible in the future.
Yeah. But the idea is that a Greta Thunberg of today is not the same Greta Thunberg of tomorrow or of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years in the future, right? They will ask for even further things. And then it's about, well, will the different viewpoints of the Gretas be that much difference, that this difference between the rich that can afford this moral standpoint and the poor that can't be larger with time, or will it get smaller with time as innovation tries to catch up?
It will get smaller. It will get smaller for sure.
Well, I also hope so. I hope so.
What do you think? So we're hoping right now. I think it'll get smaller, and I hope it gets smaller. I think everyone hopes it gets smaller, right? Because if it gets smaller, then that means more newer technologies available for everyone, which is always an upside. But what do you think is going to happen? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, in order to be able to think about this, you have to think about in my opinion, you can think of the wealth gap, or much easier, the wage gap. Right. So in the U.S., if we continue to have working poor and you continue to have a minimum wage, I don't believe firstly I do believe in the minimum wage to a certain degree, but not like a very strict one. But if that continues to be as low such that there exists working poor, this difference in the moral standpoints, I think, will continue to exist. We need kind of a social reform in some countries such that the gap between the rich and the poor doesn't continue to exist. In economics, Omar, we call this the Gini coefficient. And for the listeners that don't know this, we call this the Gini coefficient, which is basically how much difference there exists between the rich and the poor in the degree of wealth. Yes, and it's quite high in countries such as the US and in the UK. Those are some among the highest in the world.
Where rich people are incredibly rich and poor people are incredibly poor, I would assume.
Exactly. But in countries such as Denmark and Sweden, and I think also Canada to some extent, I think Canada is in the middle, but Denmark it's quite low. However, this Gini coefficient has increased for all countries in the past 20 years, even for Denmark, right? To the extent where we think it's too great, and we need, I would call it maybe a social reform in order to have a new distribution, or at least a more fair distribution of wealth, before we can really have um, a moral, or that we can really judge people, start to judge people if they are living up to our moral standpoint, right? Because if you're poor, you're just thinking about surviving, right? You see in the US at this point that a lot of people are thrown out of their houses because they can't pay rent. I, I would never imagine myself telling them, hey, think about the environment.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When you're put in a place of survival, right? You're just looking for the bare necessities. The necessities are top priority, not the environment.
Exactly.
You're not going to go for a veggie burger instead of a normal burger. You're just going to go for whatever's accessible, whatever's going to get your stomach full. You know, at the end of the day,
the cheapest at the end of the day.
Yeah, so yeah, I understand that, but see, I'm not an economist, and I'm hearing of this Gini coefficient for the first time.
Yeah.
So, what do you think would be a solution to minimizing this Gini effect? You said it's been increasing on a global scale for the past 20 years. What do you think has been causing it to increase, and what do you think is going to decrease it?
Well, we are still trying to understand it. However, of course, there is a part of it is the intergenerational mobility, right? And a part of it is also the education. So intergenerational mobility means that if your parent is doing something, are you doing the exact same thing? If your parent, and also if your parent is rich, what is the probability that you will also be rich, right? So what is the probability that a generation moves up or down in the social um, ranking? That's okay. That's maybe too harsh, but in the wealth, let's just call it the wealth.
The socioeconomic ranking. No,
yeah. Let's call it that. Then, yeah.
Now, what do you say would be the cost? Okay, so I would agree with you. Here, let's start off with this. I would agree with you. I have seen, and it honestly just goes without thinking, right? That someone whose father is wealthy, or someone who comes from a wealthy family, usually is going to become successful and wealthy in their lifetime.
Yeah.
And then vice versa, someone who's poor and was raised in not the best circumstance is not going to have or live in the best circumstances in the future.
Yeah. What we can do about it is though a totally different question. I think we only have 10 minutes left until you have to leave. So I want to ask you something, because I think it's useful to ask you this question, you Gen Z child.
Hey, listen, man, listen. Hey, I didn't want to say this, but you're a Gen Z too. You're right at the cap.
Okay, so I don't know if you've heard about a prime minister of the UK that was called Margaret Thatcher. She was in the same era of as Ronald Reagan, and she said that. Okay, I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but you won't because there is a little bit of lag. But she said that she have made everyone richer in the UK, right? However, the gap is bigger. So her argument is, would you rather have a difference down here, right? So the poorest individual doesn't increase in the wealth, and you have maybe that the rich doesn't really become richer, but a small difference here. And or would you rather have that the poor become a little bit richer and then the rich become even richer, such that the difference between them become even larger? And she argues for the later thing. I don't know if you can see it now in the camera, that this difference is better, right?
Well, I can't see it, but from what I got from what you said right now, she chooses the latter. She chooses the.
Yeah, maybe we can even I can even open the camera here if you can see me on the camera. I can show it to you. Just on your phone. So yes, would you want it to be this, right? Or would you want it to be this? Right?
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me just turn off the camera such that the connection becomes better. Yes.
Would I want it to be? Well, I mean, personally, I'm an advocate for everyone becoming richer, right?
Yeah.
So what's the question here exactly?
Well, the question is if, right, because that relates to the discussion that we had of the wealth gap and the Gini coefficient, as I told you, right? So in the first case, right, the Gini coefficient is low. But in the second case, the Gini coefficient is quite large. However, everyone is also richer. So are you willing to sacrifice
which one would I prefer?
Are you willing? The question is really, are you willing to sacrifice that difference in, I suppose, the wealth between people for a richer country where everyone is richer?
Yeah, well, I mean, if society benefits as a whole, it doesn't matter who's the differentiation between people's wealth. I don't think matters very much if the whole country as a whole is getting richer, right? People that are doing incredibly well are there because of opportunity and because of hard work and because of the time and effort that they put in, right? So I would say that they deserve it. But if the whole country is benefiting in the latter, so I would definitely say the latter. No.
Yeah, but then you're counteracting the idea that you want a more equal society, right? Where everyone can have moral standpoints, because in the late yes, everyone is richer and everyone can buy more things, but however, the difference between people is quite substantial. Yes, the country becomes richer as a whole, but if you cannot live together, there is some social cost to that, in my opinion, at least. And that's my personal opinion. I know I should be an interviewer here, but that's my personal viewpoint.
Why wouldn't you be able to live together? And this has nothing to do with moral standpoints. This is something completely different. I mean, the country is getting rich as a whole. I mean, like poor people benefit more in the latter. They don't benefit more in the first point. They don't benefit more in the first option. They benefit more in the second option. So why would that be so bad?
Yeah, but that relates back to the moral standpoint kind of thing, right?
My morals. When I said moral standpoint, I regard that to the environment, and I regard that to humanitarian reasons, right? Things about race, things about other forms of equality. I don't really believe in wealth equality. I believe that if you got to a place where you have a lot of money, I believe that you got there because of your hard work. You didn't get there just because you got there.
Okay.
I don't believe that I totally don't believe in communism. I definitely don't believe in socialism. I actually think that those are morally wrong and morally incorrect.
Okay. Okay, so, let me okay, because I only have 4 minutes left. Let me put it in more black and white. Yeah. Would you? And this is an example, because this is plagiarism if I don't do that. This is an example that is directly taken, or a question that is directly taken from a book that I read, Adaptive Economics, I think, and the author is Andrew Lowe. He starts out by asking the reader, and this is also a question to you, which world would you rather live in? A world where the rich can afford to go into space exploration and take and eat dinner in space for entertainment, or a world where no one could afford to go out to space, but no one slept hungry or went to bed hungry?
Well, that is a good question. See, that definitely needs more than not only 3 minutes of talking. That needs more than 3 minutes of thinking. Like I just, Here's what I have to say briefly. This is what comes to mind first.
Yes.
I would say the first. I would say space exploration. And the reason for that is, if the rich are benefiting so much, then the choice that you have as a poor person is to just become richer. Seize every opportunity that you get, work harder, work smarter, and work at becoming richer, so you have that type of privilege, and so you're able to have those kind of commodities. Commodities are always going to exist. Luxuries are always going to exist. I don't see the reasoning and the logic behind dragging a group of people behind for working harder in their lifetime.
Okay. I can hear in your voice that you're very much against even the small part of changing the wealth distribution, or influencing it in any part. I would personally choose the second one, because there is going to exist. No, not only that, but and you could even say that's because you live in a socialistic country such as Denmark, right? But at the end of the day, maybe it's an old woman that can't work, that doesn't know how to, that does not have the capacity to go out and work, right, and bring her own bread to the table, as one would say, and therefore, and because I don't know the circumstances, right, my gut tells me, hey, I don't want anyone to go to bed hungry if that comes at the cost of someone not doing space exploration, right? Because that's at the end of the day, that's entertainment. And maybe I have also phrased it wrongly, but it was more meant of space entertainment, and that's also why I said go out to outer space and eat lunch. It was meant as entertainment.
As entertainment, I know.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Well, see, this is the thing. Yeah. I don't want anyone to go hungry either. I think that there will be a time in the future where no one will go hungry. Everyone will have enough food.
Yeah, but we're working at the moment against each other, right? We have people that, like, instead of caring about the environment so much, maybe care about the people in Africa or in Southeast Asia, right? It might not have clothes even to wear, and don't have clean water, and don't have all of these things, right? Those are maybe even more important things than the environment, and that's I suppose I and the a little bit older generation are talking about. At least I know that Putin has a small video on YouTube where he says that Greta Thunberg is too naive, right?
I mean, this is what I have to say to that. I don't think anything is more important than the environment. The environment, the Earth is where we sit on. We have no other planet other than this.
Yeah, right? Yeah, but then
if you're thinking about people starving in Africa today, then your thinking is only short term. You have to think more long term than that. Then you're only thinking it's actually quite selfish. Excuse me, but it is, right? You have to think about the future generations. The humanity is not going to end after you. It's not going to end after me. It's not going to end after the generation after us. Humanity is going to go on forever, and the environment is definitely much more important than. I wouldn't say definitely, right? It's subjective. It's subjective in terms of how people react to it emotionally, but I would say that the environment is more important, because without an environment there would be no people, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Okay.
Would you disagree?
Yes, yes. I would. I'm not going to say that the environment is not important, but I would say that maybe starving children and maybe creating a more sustainable society in an entire continent is more important than taking care of small things
but that's
up
a
here.
Short-term solution. That's putting Band-Aid on a wound, man. That's putting a Band-Aid on a wound. Without an environment.
No, it's not, because it's a little bit. Yeah, but those people are dying, and their generations will never have anything. But of course, you can also not say let's go down and help them, because they also have to help themselves, right? So it's a very lengthy discussion, and I don't know. Do you have more time to talk? Firstly.
Man, I would love to more than anything, but
yeah.
I would have to go.
Okay. Do you have any final remarks?
Um, no, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I do. Uh, my final remarks are very similar to the ones of yesterday.
Yeah.
To the final remarks of yesterday, and that is to go out there, take care of your planet. Your planet is yours, and it's your responsibility to maintain it, maintain its health, maintain its beauty, not only for yourself but for the generations coming after you. And that's your job as a human being. That is your job as a human being, other than reproducing and continuing humanity. That is your job, is to maintain the environment for the future generations.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks for the lovely words and the motivation. Take care, man.
As always, Karim, I love talking with you, and I love our conversations. And hopefully, we can do another one tomorrow.
Me too, man. Okay. Yeah. Take care. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
So that was Omar, my cousin that lives currently in 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 Canada, Toronto, or at least very much beside Toronto. And as we can hear, he is a little bit liberal, and he does care very much for the environment. Right? He might also be a little bit conservative, I think, or at least modern conservative. Right. There was an underlying tone of privilege, I think, but let's not go into that. Right. The most important thing, which I found to be interesting, is the political correctness. Right, because the first thing that we talked was about boycotting, and there we had a small difference. But once we got that understanding aligned, um, suddenly we did not have that much different viewpoints, um, which of course might be a fault from my point of view, but yeah, uh, and maybe I should have used a different word, but maybe also we can generalize. Of course, I'm always fearful about generalizing, but maybe that's also what's happening out there, right? That you don't sit down, discuss these things, because you might mean the exact same thing, however, you're using different words, right? The English language and all languages are developing with time, and the words that you used to use in your field might be different than a different person's um, words and the things that he or she are used to hear. So sit down and just have an open discussion. Be open minded, right? Um, as he did and as I did. In that you might be incorrect, right? And the other person that you're talking to might as well have a point, right? Um, Now he also said a very interesting thing, right? The accessibility, that luxury today will change to become something normal of tomorrow. And that is, of course, how it works, right? You have these first movers that move into a market. They earn a profit, but then let's say they have a patent on this product. When the patent goes away, well, then suddenly every other company can produce this product, and they will be able to sell it. They will also be able to produce it to a lower price, right? Competition usually drives prices down. And to you listeners that want to increase their jargon of economic words, use betrang competition, right? So competition in prices. Competition in quantity would be uh, con. Ooh, I forgot that. Ah, it's not good. It's not good. It's betrang competition if it's for price. Kono competition if it's in quantity. But yeah, if a betrang competition decreases the price, it reaches marginal cost of production. Fine, great, right? Then then it becomes a normal thing, and everyone can buy it. That's what we've seen with cell phones, right? It's a normal thing. even more simpler, the computer, right? At least here in Denmark, it's a basic necessity to have a computer or something that can connect to the internet, um, as your social security number is now connected to 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 a digital form, and all the emails that you get, or usually all the connection that you have with the state, come to you via something called e-box, which is something electronics or electronic box, right? Instead of having it in the mail. Now, of course, older people can get it in the mail, but for the most part, it's via the internet that you receive your information, and that you communicate with the state. So yes, luxury of today is going to become normal of tomorrow, because the marginal production will be lower due to innovation, firstly, and secondly, because of competition, the Bertrand competition. He ended with environment, saying that the environment is the most important thing. We had a small discussion at the end that I might be short-term sighted, in the sense that I want the prosperity of countries that are less wealthy, right? And I would allow them to use things that are not particularly sustainable. So I would allow those countries to use oil, at least to reach the same level as us, right? Because we know, right, that they, as the discussion with the difference, right? Rich people have a moral standpoint. Poor people cannot, because they just want this to sustain their bare existence, right? So of course, the cheapest way of production, they would use that, right? Uh, and therefore, I would not be against them using oil or even coal to produce electricity. Uh, Now, when a rich country such as China starts to use coal, I might be a little bit skeptic, right? Because yes, per capita basis, you are poor, but not poor, not even, right? Well, I think they are now in the middle, but but still, it's a very wealthy country. Yes. So is it long-term sustainable to use oil? Well, the idea is that these poor countries just need to just at least not catch up, maybe, but just reach a sustainable level, right? Until they are capable, well, time-wise, until the production of the things that are sustainable for the future are worth it to them. So, for instance, at the beginning they could not buy windmills, which made perfect sense because those were usually subsidized by the government and they were quite expensive. However, now we know that a company such as Vestas does not, actually, they are asking the state not to subsidize them, and I actually think that they are not receiving any subsidization from the Danish state, and they can now produce things to a very cheap price, and right, and they are competitive on the world market. And you see a country such as Egypt, which has GDP per capita of, I think, $3,000 or something like that, a very very poor nation compared to the rest of the world. They have a large amount of windmills, but they would not have done that had they had the price of these windmills not been low, right? So we need to give them a break such that they can catch up, and this way they would be able to be even more sustainable, right? Because as they become richer, the more they would care about the environment. As we said, usually, I think you can also take that up and scale it up to the macro level. The individual has a utility that he receives from uh, consumption, so the materialistic things, and the non-materialistic, which is leisure, right? Or leisure, let's call that non-materialistic things. Let's take that to the macroeconomic level, i.e., the country level, and therefore the consumption is the bare subsistence of the population, right? And the other thing is maybe this environmental agenda. Now, a lot of countries, have enough consumption so that they can care about the environment. However, some don't, a lot don't. And Omar's argument, I'm not going to take it to the extreme, but was that it was in the long run not sustainable. And of course, it's not sustainable if those poor countries continue to use fossil fuel. But the idea is that they need to do it because, firstly, that means that they will catch up faster and be able to make this trade off and be more sustainable. And also, that allows them to maybe also produce their own thing, firstly. Uh, right? Be able to trade, also some other discussions, but they need to catch up, right? To be able to buy this, and it would also at that time maybe they would the production cost of these luxuries will be cheap enough that these countries can buy them. So we'd even decrease the time for the poor countries to be able to buy these things. And that is the main argument, right? We want them to catch up. If that comes at the cost of using oil in the short term, well, that is better than them having to wait 50 or 100 years, right? Because that's a lost generation. And that, of course, creates some other problems. And since this is Karim talks about economics and not only environment, I can talk about these. And that is the idea that may reduce the security of those countries. And by security, I mean that people would go more in wars with each other, civil wars, as we've seen in a lot of African countries, right? Due to them wanting to capture basic necessities, maybe farmlands. Um, and that's definitely not good. And secondly, it also reduces the security of the richer countries, such that they would maybe try to migrate. And that's also what we've seen. Now, I'm going to do something that I have not done previously, which is to go to the bathroom. But we've also been in this for an hour, so I think that's fair. See you in a bit. You may take a take a break, a small break. Now we'll be back. That was it. You don't get a much longer break than this from me. Yes, so the last idea was that um, allowing those countries to use not sustainable, at least in this discussion, energy production um, tools, facilities would increase the security of those countries and also have and increasing security effect on the countries in the West, or at least the rich countries, right? By reducing migration from those countries. Um, Now, a different argument might be that, I don't know, the different argument would be that, well, if they do that, will ruin the planet even more, which will lead to even more migration of those people, right? But I in a, of course, I've not done the mathematics behind it or the statistics behind it, but I suppose the net effect would be positive with respect to security, right? That we would increase security, and that is also because by allowing them to become richer using these, let's say, fossil fuels, right? Increasing energy would also increase the people that work in these facilities. Increasing the people there would also yield that they need some food and they need some other equipment, right? And they would receive a wage for the production of this energy, and therefore you'd create a total a richer society, or at least a society that demands a little bit more, and therefore the the country as a whole will increase in wealth, right? And people would be tempted to stay, right? So a different problem of those countries, the poor countries, is, or the non-economically developed countries, or the least developed countries, least economically developed countries. There are many wordings for this because it needs to be politically correct, right? So everyone understands it, and is on the same ground when we talk about these things. A trend is that there is a high unemployment rate um, at these countries, and therefore it would be interesting to look at maybe the impact of innovation on unemployment on a macroeconomic scale, which I've thought about doing a PhD about, but yeah, let's see. Yes. So, is it a long-term solution to use fossil fuels? Definitely not. Um, should we think about the poor people and maybe allowing them to do things that are that do not live up to our moral standpoints? I think definitely, if we can create this trade-off at some point, right? Because we want them also to make that trade-off, right? We want them to say, well, the environment means something to us. We don't want them to look at us, oh, you think about the environment because you have all that money and you don't know what to do about it, right? Um, so I think it's a little bit of a privileged opinion. That's my personal viewpoint, but I'm not here to criticize anyone. The thing is that you have to look into more depth of these things, um, and I might have again misinterpreted his viewpoints. I think that's what we take from this follow up from last time, which has lasted much more than the usual 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll now go to reading a small part of Adam Smith. And as I said yesterday, this is going to be a good part because, or for me at least, it's going to be, I think, an enjoyable part because we're talking about labor again, which is the field. Uh, I would argue of my field of my interest and my no, most amount of knowledge. Right, I'm interested in a lot of things in economics, but I wrote my thesis in labor economics and wealth economics, kind of. So it's chapter 3 of the accumulation of capital, or of productive and unproductive labor. Right. Just take a sip of water first. There's one, and then it starts, and this is page 175. There's one sort of labor which adds to the value of the subject upon which it is bestowed. There is another which has no such effect. So that's, I suppose he's talking about the value added, right? The idea of the value added. So value added from labor. There's no such, yes. The former, as it produces a value, may be called productive, the later unproductive labor. Some French authors of great learning and ingenuity have used those words in a different sense. In the last chapter or the fourth book, I shall endeavor to show that their sense is an improper one. Okay, so it's an interesting. That's an interesting thing, right? To say it. Maybe he's genuine and says this is an improper one, or maybe that gives an underlying tone that the English and the Brits. Well, he's not British. He's Scottish. Um, that the British and the French maybe don't like each other. Of course, relates also to a lot of wars that occurred between them. But yeah, let's carry on. Thus, the labor of a manufacturer adds generally to the value of the material which he works upon, that of his own maintenance and of his master's profit. The labor of a menial servant, on the contrary, adds to the value of nothing. Okay, though the manufacturer has his wages advanced to him by his master, he is uh, he in reality costs him no expense, the value of those wages being generally restored, together with a profit in the improved value of the subject upon which his labor is bestowed. But the maintenance of a menial servant never is restored. A man grows rich by employing a multitude of manufacturers. He grows poor by maintenance a multitude of menial servants. The labor of the latter, however, has its value and deserves its reward as well as of the former. But the labor of a manufacturer fixes and realizes itself in some particular subjects or indiable commodity which lasts for some time, at least after the labor in the past. It is as it were a certain quantity of labor stocked and stored up to the employed, if necessary, upon some other occasion. That subject, or what is the same thing, the price of the subject can afterwards, if necessary, put into motion a quantity of labor equal to that which originally produced it. The labor of the menial servant, on the contrary, does not fix or realize itself in any particular subjects or vendible commodity. His services generally perish in the very instant of their performance and seldom leave any trace of value behind them, for which an equal quantity of service could not afterwards be procured. It's a quite interesting idea, right? That some labor adds value while others are unproductive. So, but this is it's not, and as he says here, that it's not that the services are then unimportant. It's just that they produce something that cannot be realized, right? Or for which the value cannot be realized because, an interesting thought here. Maybe that's because this that the servant is producing is not tradable, right? Once it has been produced, so maybe making the bed, right? Once the bed has been made, that cannot be traded, right? Because it's one bed, it's been made. It's the action of making the bed. Now, of course, you can then trade the servant himself, right? And at this time, I suppose you could, but we're talking about the actual action, right? And that the bed is made cannot really be traded. We could even make it more simple by saying that he brings you a cup of water, right? And you drink the cup of water and he takes the cup again. It's a service that cannot really be traded. However, when producing maybe the bed itself, the bed is tradable, right? So maybe that's why there is a value added from the manufacturer and not from the servant. And I think what Adam Smith here means by the value added is something that can be added to, because this book is of the wealth of nations. It relates to what can be counted in the gross domestic product of the country, right? Um, if I may be so bold, right, and I want to have a woman with me at some point, uh, because I had a small discussion about this with some of my friends, a female friend, also a male friend. We were sitting in a group. Um, the idea was that, well, this is a quite extreme example, but I'm just going to say it as it was discussed. We were talking about a female in the labor market, and we thought that uh, it was maybe too extreme that they had to bear children, but also work as much as the males in the labor market and expecting the same wage. In that regard, is kind of unrealistic, and it makes sense that we do have a wage gap between the two sexes. And a solution that I personally proposed, and I think I got a little bit criticized for, but however, I'm here uh, talking with you guys, and this is about economics. It's my viewpoint, so I can share this viewpoint with you, and you can tell me what you think. Which is that maybe we can put some value on childbearing, right? So you give birth to a child, and you earn something that you would otherwise have earned in the labor market, or even a higher wage, right? So you get a wage for staying at home and taking care of your child. Now, some people might call that maternal leave, and then you get some money from the worker and things like that. And yes, then you might say, well, you earn in the labor market something because you increased your human capital. However, maybe at some point it will be accepted to say, well, I had a child, and write that on your CV. I think a lot of people write that on the CV, but maybe it's portrayed negatively because it takes time and you have to take your children. Maybe if your child becomes sick, you have to stay at home with them. However, if we can put some monetary value into that, especially in a world, in the Western world, where we see the childbearing is at a rate of 1.8 and 1.9, right, such that the population is actually decreasing, and Hungary comes to mind here. We can maybe put a value on that, right, um, and that would decrease the difference, which is quite, in my opinion, very well explained by this, or to some degree at least, explained can be explained by the childbearing ability of females, right? Uh, a different thing would be that they then you create a match, and the female receives the money from the male, right, as a compensation for staying at home or something like that. But that's of course between the families. Ha- However, the main idea here that related to Adam Smith was to put a monetary value on service. But of course, that would be a little bit inhumane, because then you would put childbearing in the GDP of the country, and that of course, yeah, brings up some moral that has some moral questionability. But I think it would be nice to have this open discussion with a female partner and see what she thinks about this, if I'm too extreme or not. But yeah, let's continue. Let me take a sip of water first. Yes. So the labor of some of the most respectable orders of society is, like that of menial servants, unproductive of any value. and does not fix or realize itself in any permanent subject or vendible commodity, which endures after that labor is past, and for which an equal quantity of labor could afterwards be produced. The sovereign, for example, with all the officers, both of justice and war, who serves under him, the whole army and navy are unproductive laborers. They are the servants of the public and are maintained by a part of the annual produce of the industry of other people. Their service, how honorable, how useful, or how necessary soever, produces nothing for which an equal quantity of service can afterwards be produced. The protection, security, and defense of the commonwealth, the effect of their labor this year, will not purchase its protection, security, and defense for the year to come. In the same class, well, you don't have to put it in that way, right? I'm gonna highlight this because I'm a little bit against this, right? Because you could monetize it, and I think it's a quite important thought here, that you have to try to monetize this and maybe put value on the security of a country, which increases the willingness of investors to invest in that country, and that is sustainable. That's a quite physical. Well, it's not a direct physical product, but it is a physical product, right? Uh, Producing the security, right, that allows. So maybe the probability of a firm to be bombed, right? If you compare Denmark with Syria, that's a quite feasible thing to measure. And also Yemen, for instance, it's a quite feasible thing to include in your maybe in your GDP, right? The probability that this firm will not be bombed. So that's an increase in the value of this firm, right? Because the chances that this building will exist in the future are quite high, while in Yemen or in Syria the probability is quite low. That might already be taken in the account, right, when doing an investment in those countries. But the idea is here to put a value on the military, right? And you can use the difference in this price and account that to the existence of a successful military of that nature, and a policing force, right? In the same class must be ranked some both of the gravest and most important, and some of the most frivolous professions: churchmen, lawyers, physicians, men of letter of any kinds, players, buffoons, musicians, opera singers, opera dancers, etc. The labor of the meanest of these has a certain value, regulated by the very same principles which regulate that of every other sort of labor, and that of the noblest and most useful uh, produces nothing which could afterwards purchase or produce an equal quantity of labor. So yes, I was right in the sense that you don't create a physical thing that can be traded, which is quite nice to know, right? Thank you, Adam Smith, for agreeing with me. Or, yeah. Like the decl- declamation of the actor, the harangue of the orator, or the tune of the musician, the work of all of them perishes in the very instance of its production. Now, of course, this is not true today, right? In that a musician can record his voice and sell it. Previously in physical form, today on streaming services. Which is quite interesting, right? Because you could make one CD tradable with a different CD. I'm quite sure that happened, right? Oh, I've hit this CD. Now your turn, right? But now the question is, well, is it the CD, right? Does the value come from the CD or the voice that is recorded on the CD? But at least the voice can be monetized, right? And that's what I'm arguing for with the security. Do that. Introduce that into the GDP. Allow it to increase, right? And thereby allowing the central bank to print even more money. But yeah, that would just be a shift, right? It wouldn't be a new tilt such that the GDP increases faster, uh, right? So yes, I might have a point, but it's not a very strong point, at least. Like the declaration of yes, we've read that. Both productive and unproductive laborers, and those who do not labor at all, unemployed, are all equally maintained by the annual produce of the land and labor of the country. This produce, how great soever, can never be infinite, but must have certain limits. According, therefore, as a small or greater proportion of it is in any one year employed in maintaining unproductive hands, the more in the one case and the less in the other will remain for the productive, and the next year's produce will be greater or smaller accordingly. The whole annual produce, if we expect a spontaneous product of the earth, being the effect of the productive labor. Though the whole annual produce of the land and labor of every country is no doubt ultimately destined for supplying the consumption of its inhabitants and for procuring revenue to them, yet when it first comes, either from the ground or from the hands of the productive laborers, it naturally divides itself into two parts. One of them, and frequently the largest, is, in the first place, destined for replacing a capital or for the renewing the previous materials and finished work, which had been withdrawn from a capital. The other, for constituting revenue either to the owner of this capital as the profit of his stock, or to some other person as the rent of his land. Yes. Thus, of the produce of land, one part replaces the capital of the farmer, the other pays his profit and the rent of the landlord, and thus constitute a revenue both to the owner of the capital as the profit of his stock, and to some other person as the rent of his land. Right? Um, of the produce of a greater manufacturer in the same manner, one part, and that always the largest replaces the capital of the undertaking of the manner, and one part, and that always the largest replaces the capital of the undertaker of the worker. The other pays his profit and thus constitutes a revenue to the owner of this capital. Yeah, I think that's it for today, because I feel that will not be very productive by reading even more, because this is quite interesting thoughts, right? So the last thought here is the idea that the productive, and that also is also what we've been talking, what he has been talking about for the past, I suppose, two pages here, is that productive labor and land have to be able to sustain the eller to sustain both the living let's call it living standard of the poor of the productive and unproductive laborer. And laborer relates to worker. And here, of course, let's also say that laborer or non-laborer, which is either you're working or you're not. Maybe because you're a child. Of course, I don't think there existed labor laws at that point for children, but it might be that you're a pensioner or maybe you're handicapped and cannot work for some other reason. Blind, deaf, totally handicapped, physically handicapped, mentally handicapped. Regardless, we're not gonna let you starve. Um, the productive labor and the land. Well, maybe we give you actuarially physical products that you can consume, or maybe we give you a sum of money that you can trade for the things that you want, and giving you a lot of freedom in that sense. Um, yes. So that's a quite interesting thing, right? Um, that we only have some that are productive, and then we have a large part of the population that are unproductive. Well, today, right? Maybe it's not unproductive, but at least it's service, so service industry maybe. And I think here yeah, the productive laborer, at least if we consider the state level, right? It's those working in the private sector, those working in the public sector. So the private sector has to be able to pay the public sector. People working in the public sector and the unemployed and all the services that are offered by the public sector. Right, as I said, the military, the nurses, at least here in Denmark, right, the nurses, the physicians, and things like that. But the idea was, but he even took it to a further extent, right? That he said, for instance, the farming of the bananas. The bananas have to be enough not only for the productive but also to the unproductive laborer. I think it's time to go to the next section of this podcast. We're an hour and 30 minutes in approximately, and that is new thoughts. And as per usual, to do that, we have to consider the things that we've talked about. And let's first start with what we discussed with Omar, which is the first thing that we discussed was the misunderstanding that happened yesterday because of my wording of a boycott, right? That was too extreme, and I relate that to something. I think it's a global phenomenon, at least in the West, with political correctness. There are people have started to misunderstand each other, and therefore they think that one is wrong and one is right. However, we just need to get on the same page and really know what we're talking about and where our thoughts align and where they don't align, and let's not have language as a barrier to that, because language is a tool that we use. Um, of course, my Omar and I do have some different viewpoints, and that also came on later when we started discussing the environment. However, before that, we quite agreed on some things that maybe rich people did have a privilege in that they could have a higher moral standpoint than in other, and therefore they should not look down upon people that do not have um, enough wealth that allows them to have this moral standpoint with concerns of maybe even animal treatment, but also the environment. Uh, yes, so some privilege maybe in the Western countries that is maybe underlined so much, right? That we cannot look through that. We do not consider it as privileged, right? Um, when and yeah, I'm gonna say one thing that we agreed upon, and then I'm gonna go into that with privilege. So we talked about accessibility of these good products, or what we call luxury products, that allows you a moral standpoint, such as windmills on a macro level, but maybe an electric car on the micro level. More economically friendly car, or maybe isolation for your house, right? That is also a luxury, but it will become a normal thing as time goes by, because of two reasons. Firstly, uh, the cost of production goes down, right? And competition, mostly competition though, because it's the competition that that incentivizes companies to reduce the cost of production, right? Such that they can earn a profit. And then the thing that we disagreed upon, right, which relates to privilege, is the thing with the environment, where Omar's argument, and I'm not against this, but that environment is the most important thing, because without the globe that we live in, where would our grandchildren live? Where would our great uh, grandchildren live? Uh, Now, if we take a step back and we're a little bit open-minded, right, and we think outside the box for a little bit, for a small second, maybe the idea that you can think about your great uh, grandchildren is a privilege. Is a privilege. It's a privileged position that you can think so far ahead, that you're not concerned about your own children. That's a privilege. People in Yemen are concerned about their children, for instance. If you told them take care of the environment, because otherwise, and of course this is also an extreme point, and I know this, I will get a backlash for this, for saying this, but if you go down to Yemen and tell them, hey, think about your great grandchildren, well, you would see them handing you their children and say, okay, give me something like that, here is my child, here and now, right? So for me, yes, it, of course, taking care of the environment has to be our focus, because that is a long term view. However, it is a privileged a privilege. Yeah, okay. It is a privileged position to be in, that we can think about the long term, because some people cannot think about the short term or the medium term, right? Uh, and therefore my argument would be, well, those countries can do whatever they need to in order to be able to catch up, of course, in extreme cases, right? um, as I said previously, a country such as China should maybe not be allowed to open up more coal mines, uh, as they are, or coal plants, as they are. um, there should be something that disallowed this, because we should care about the environment, and then, right, It relates to Adam Smith's talk about the value added from labor, that there is something such as productive and unproductive labor. Maybe we can attribute extra and additional value to environmental impact, right? Not only make it just a cost, but let's give a carrot, right? Oh, your business is environmentally friendly. Well, that means that it's sustainable. That means that could theoretically exist for hundreds of years. Therefore, your business is more valuable. You can create electricity yourself. Oh, that's amazing. Right? That's also maybe, as we talked with Omar, maybe that is a part of the reason that the stock of Tesla has increased so dramatically, that it is sustainable to have this car manufacturer, right? And it is expected that this car manufacturer would be able to produce so many cars that it will become profitable for them with all of the new inventions that they have created. Yeah. And then we go into Adam Smith, where he talks more directly about productive and unproductive labor, right? Um, that people manufacturing things, people working on the farm, those are really productive things. However, people that produce services might not be that productive. So he gives an extreme example where he says, yes, the military is quite important and it keeps us all safe. However, they are unproductive, right? The security of the nation today will not make it more secure tomorrow. It's not tradable, right? It's not something that's tradable. Now, I tried to argue the case that maybe we can put a price on this security, but however, the security is so intangible that you might not be able to do that, right? But however, if a company can put a price on the goodwill, then maybe we can put a price on the security. But then you can think, well, that's the price of the government bond. What ranking is the bond? Is it triple A, triple B? What is it? BB plus? What is it? Right? Uh, and the other thing that Adam Smith talked about was the idea that the productive labor and land had to be enough sustainable, or had to produce enough to sustain both the people that worked on this farm and the people that are unproductive. On a larger scale, but on a smaller scale, he looked at it from a micro perspective and he said, well, a farmer has to be that much productive that he can sustain himself, but also the individual that owns this farm, right? Now, of course, if he owns the farm, then he's both individuals, but if he doesn't, well, he has to pay a rent to the owner of the farm, right? It's also what we see with companies. A worker receives a wage, but the stockholder also receives a wage. Not a wage, but maybe some dividends, right? Receives something, and with this dividend, he can buy something from the land, right? But however, on a more practical note, this farm has to produce maybe enough bananas that can sustain both individuals, right? Uh, so the farm itself has to be more productive. It's not only that the value of the productivity has to sustain both workers or both individuals, the productive and the unproductive, but also the physical thing has to sustain them both, right? That's a quite interesting and very deep thought, right? And then the question, well, how do you then divide this, right? Let's say that you're producing 100 bananas. Well, and then and you have this farm, you have a farmer, and you have an owner, right? I'm just trying to make it very basic, and you viewer, please take a standpoint, and maybe you can make some thoughts about this, and think about it yourself. Uh, so you have a farm that produces 100 bananas, and this economy consists of two individuals: the farmer and the guy who owns the farm, right? Now the farmer is the individual that produces all the bananas, right? And the owner is the owner of the farm. Well, how many bananas should the owner have, and how many bananas should the worker have? Now, this is a discussion that I want to have with my friend Sylvia, that I know, who is a little bit of a, and here's a wink, Marxist maybe, but he believes that maybe communism have some thoughts behind it. He might say that, well, they are both equal in value, right? And therefore should both have 50. They should divide it equally between them, and be 50-50. Now, a capitalist might say, well, you're only a worker, therefore you should have 10 and I should have 90, right? Because you could not have produced these bananas without my land. Now, of course, there could be a bargaining position, right? And that could change. And I think in labor economics we would have that it's 50-50 or something close to that, right? Search and matching models, if we use those. Oh, this is actually very close to search and matching models. I will have a podcast about my master thesis at some point. Well, I will try to interview myself. Let's see how that will work. Maybe I will have a guest interviewer, right? It will interview me about my thesis, which would be quite interesting. However, the individual also need to have an economic background. But regardless, the question then becomes, well, how do you divide the amount of the productivity of this land, the 100 bananas as such? And that's not something that we can all agree upon. That is something that has to be bargained upon in a free country, in a more strict country. Maybe there's a third individual, which is the government, that comes in, takes all 100, and then it gives as it see fit, right? But I think that's a discussion that I want to have with Silvio. Silvio Castello is his name. Yes, so as always, thanks for your attention, and that was all that I had for today. Well, let's find a question for next time. And the question, I think, well, this labor thing, I think that would be best if we discussed it tomorrow with more ideas from Adam Smith. And therefore, I think the question that I want to start to take away from today is this short term and long term perspective, right? Something like, not why do people look into the long term and short term, not even when, right? But or yeah, maybe. Okay, this is a quite obvious. This question has a quite obvious answer, but however, it would be nice to also think of examples. So, how does the behavior of individuals and states differ? Quite a broad question. Differ when they have a short term or a long term view. And as always, that's the question. How does the behavior of individuals and states differ when they have a short-term or a long-term view. So here you can create a matrix and you would have four scenarios, right? Individual short-term, individual long-term, state short-term, state long-term. And that's a discussion for tomorrow's podcast. So as always, thanks for tuning in, and I will of course not leave you like this. I'll leave you with some motivation, and the motivation is, while it was yesterday, just keep swimming. Today it is something that comes from, at least the first time that I heard it, was an Arabic saying. I think it might only be Egyptian. I don't know. But I will say it in Arabic and then I will translate it and give more, uh, put it in perspective. العقل السليم في الجسم السليم, which means that a healthy mind is in a healthy body. So one should take care of his own body, right? Because that will give you a healthy mind. What does that mean? Well, quite practically, it means that you should not eat too much, not get too fat, go out for a run, take care of your blood sugar, eat healthy, right? Because that way you create a healthy mind. Don't take risks that might reduce the amount of limbs that you have in your body, right? This way you have a more healthy mind. Um, However, more philosophically, it means that you should take care of yourself, right? Should think of your body, as they say, as a palace. Uh, of course, not being too narcissistic and American Psycho, uh, but take care of yourself, because you want yourself to be the best self that you could be. That is quite important when you think about it. When you look at yourself and you like what you see. Now, given that you don't have any visual disabilities, you might think that, yes, today is going to be a good day. But if you don't like how you look, right, and that's the idea of positive body positivity. Can you trick yourself into thinking that, oh yeah, I'm good? Well, yes, you can trick yourself, but does that trick work every single time? It most definitely doesn't. Uh, because if you can feel in your body that you quickly get tired and that you can't run up the stairs and things like that, then you might think a little bit badly about yourself and you might push yourself a little. I think it's called punch yourself a little bit down, kick yourself in the stomach, and things like that. So just take a walk every single day. Meditate. That also help, and I've also heard that might help with obesity even. Just go to a sport. Go for a run. That's the easiest thing. Take deep breaths, but and take a regular shower. Cut your hair, trim your beard if you're a man, right? Shave your legs if you're a woman, if you're into that stuff. Um, Wear makeup if you like that. Do whatever feels good, right? But be healthy. Don't just what feels good, but be healthy about it. And the mind will follow, right? Because the mind state, right? You might feel, well, there's a difference between feeling and thinking, right? Uh, but once you feel that you're healthy, And once you know that you're healthy also, you might start to think, well, now it's time to think about my brain. How can I make my brain healthy? Now you can also go the reverse and make your brain healthy, but your brain will tell you better take care of your body first, right? Because I live in this body, dude or girl, right? Hey, dude, I live in this body. Take care of this body so I can be healthy, right? Eat healthy food. That's also things that one should take care of. So that's the motivation for today. Stay healthy in your body so you can stay healthy in your mind. Okay. As per usual, take care. I wish you all the best and I love you. I really do. Take care. Take care of yourself and of all the people that you meet, physically and non physically, and even all the people that you don't know. Wish them the best. And don't think bad of anyone. And talk to them, right? Be open, be spontaneous, and try to be informative. Try to do things that yields value for others and for yourself. It's quite important as well. So the podcast is spontaneous.